It's time for episode 13 of the mysticaltimesblog podcast with me, Michele Eve. It's the Halloween episode, and it's called Scary Monsters, Super Creeps. Monsters can be metaphors for human fears, and they are usually scary in their appearance and materialise as though they have been conjured up from a nightmare. What about those monsters who seem to appear as something familiar to us and then trick us into following them into danger? Both of these experiences I will share with you are deeply disturbing and very, very spooky indeed. If you go down to the woods today. This is the go-to post on Mumsnet when spooky experiences are discussed. So here's the post. Warning, it's very long, sorry, and very freaky, and if anyone can come up with a rational explanation, I'd be extremely grateful, because I'm a generally pretty rational, non-woo, where's the evidence person. But I've never been able to explain this, and it still makes my heart beat faster and the hair stand up on my arms when I think about it years later. I was pet sitting for my friend several years ago. She had moved into a sort of small holding right on the edge of a village in the southwest of England, with a huge garden that backed onto trees. At the time she had chickens, ducks, a couple of Shetlands, cats and 4 black retrievers, 3 of which were fully grown and 1 was a half-grown puppy. Originally, my husband had been going to come with me as a little holiday, but the date she ended up having to go away for work clashed with a couple of his medical appointments, so he stayed at home with our dog, and I went to pet sit alone. It was halfway through my stay, with just a couple more nights to go. Late one evening, already dark, when I heard a massive commotion from the chicken shed, banging and thumping. I assumed a fox or something had got in, so went out to check. As I was halfway across the garden, the noise stopped instantly, as if it had been shut off. By the time I got to the shed, all was calm and the chickens were all settled, mostly asleep. No sign of any intruder or disturbance at all. Nothing to explain the noise or any indications that the chickens had made a noise. Bit freaky, but I didn't know much about the ways of chickens, so I locked up again and left them to it. As I went back into the house, a small black shape ran past me out of the back door, and I realised the puppy must have got out. It streaked across the garden and off towards the woods. Cue much cursing, then calling her name in vain. More cursing when she didn't come back. I grabbed a torch, put 1 of the other dogs on the lead, partly for protection, partly because I thought the pup was more likely to come back if I had one of her canine companions with me, and partly because I didn't fancy my chances of finding my way back to the house on my own, even though there were a couple of vague paths that I had followed when walking the dogs throughout the week. Off we trudged into the woods along one of these paths, me calling Pup's name at intervals and trying not to imagine murderers and rapists behind every tree trunk. We got to a point where it felt like the trees were starting to thin out, and I remember thinking that I didn't remember a clearing on this path, and we must have gone wrong somewhere when the dog with me slowed right down and started to resist going forward. I tried to jolly her along, while my stomach suddenly dropped like a stone, and she started growling, a really low, serious, rumbling growl. By this time, I was practically crapping myself. I tried shining the torch ahead, but the beam just sort of bounced back off the darkness, if that makes sense. I got the sense of something, or some things, moving, but just sinuous, deeper black shapes against the blackness and always on the periphery of vision. The hairs on my arms are standing up again, and just remembering how completely and utterly terrified I was. I have honestly never known a feeling like it. At this point, the dog sat right down, still growling, hackles up, and refused to budge. I muttered something like, "Jesus, you've got to be kidding me!" And this ugly, gurgling, inhumane voice hissed right up close, as if someone was right next to me.
"Don't say that name."
At the same time, there was a horrible snickering sort of laugh. I can't express how utterly petrified I was. I can't remember having any coherent thoughts apart from the word evil. That's the only clear thing I remember. Me and the dog were frozen to the spot with pure fear. Then a different voice, really commanding, said,
"Go back."
That sounded more in my head, but echoey, where the others had sounded out in the air. Wherever it came from, it did the trick. Me and the dog turned and belted back through the woods. She basically towed me. I just clung onto her lead, stumbling to keep up and sobbing with fear. I lost the torch somewhere in that wild run, but there was no way I was stopping to find it. How I didn't run blindly into a tree, I'll never know. She guided me, I guess. I can remember thinking desperately that I mustn't let go of her lead, or they would get me. When we got back to the garden, she suddenly stopped. I did fall over her this time onto my hands and knees, and she turned round, started snarling, proper teeth bared, rabid-looking snarls, back at the trees and the darkness. I thought I heard the snickering again, but the blood was pounding in my ears so hard I couldn't be sure. I scrambled up and ran to the back door, and she followed me, but barking and snarling all the way, as if holding something at bay. Oh, and the chicken shed was banging and the thumping again. I got the back door open. Me and the dog belted in. I slammed every bolt behind us. The other dogs left behind were staring at the door and growling too with their hackles up. And when I saw all three of them, puppy included, acting like that, I started to cry properly, because I honestly thought I was trapped in some horror film nightmare and I was going to die. I don't know, I still don't know, what the black shape that ran past me out of the house and triggered all of this, because the puppy was right there in the kitchen. I made sure every door and window was locked and bolted. I turned on every light in the house. I wandered round mumbling all sorts of weird, half-religious, half-spiritual shit to ward off evil spirits. Gradually, the dog settled down and stopped growling, and eventually stopped glancing at the door. Funnily enough, I didn't sleep for 1 second that night, and I rang my husband and begged him to come over the last couple of days. I know I didn't dream it, because I was covered in scratches from running through the woods and had grazed hands where I fell over the dog in the garden. Nothing like that has happened before or since, and I hope it never, ever does. It was the most horrible, terrifying experience of my life. The Monster of Minnesota. This experience happened to me and 2 friends in Minnesota in 2006 around Halloween. The place this happened at was the Holy Name Cemetery, and it was around 8 p.m. So it's pretty dark, apart from some backlights from the mainly deserted road and the solar lights on the graves and our torchlights. I was with 2 friends who are called J and M, and both lived in Minnesota. It was J that had particularly wanted to visit the cemetery at night, despite our trips out there during daylight hours. She felt if a visit happened in the dark hours, something may occur, and by that she meant something along the lines of capturing an EVP, light anomalies, or even a ghostly figure. I must say that during the day it was an extremely serene and pleasant place to visit. Strangely enough, She was the only one out of us three not to witness the highly strange creature that Em and I saw. You could enter the cemetery by car and could actually drive through it, but we parked up just inside the entry road and got out to walk along the gravel road that doubled as a path. The graves were on the right, slightly uphill, and to the left there was a large pond which had a grass verge and then the gravel road. I felt uneasy as soon as we got out the car. I felt there could have been due to being in a cemetery without permission at night, and maybe the police would turn up and tell us to leave or even arrest us. We started to walk along the gravel road. My friend Jay had a video camera and was focused on the grave area. I was in the middle, recording on my digital voice recorder and pointing my torch towards the gravel path, as was my other friend Em. I kept saying I felt uneasy. I was slightly agitated for no reason, as I'm not afraid of the dark or cemeteries. We walked along the gravel path, with it crunching beneath our unison footsteps, when my torch shone upon something darker than dark. I lifted my torch up to see what it was, and as I looked right up to where my torch shone, I saw this creature who was solid black, yet it had texture to it, and it was slowly coming out of the body of water, along the grassy verge, and then the gravel path. I saw what looked like shiny, rubber-looking wings, which were attached to an upper limb of some sorts, as the creature was pulling its wing up and across its face, as though my torchlight was too bright for it to look at. The only thing I can compare that action to is the old Bela Lugosi character who would shield its face and eyes with a cape. This creature stood around 9 foot tall, on 2 legs, and I could see its side profile. When I saw it, it felt as though I'd been punched in the stomach and I felt winded. All I could muster saying was, "What's that?" My friend Em was to my left and said, "I see it too." I responded by saying, "I don't like it here." So Em and I ran the 300 yards back to the parked car, leaving Jay there all on her own, and she had the car keys. My friend Jay insisted on driving the car through the cemetery, despite Em and I protesting for her not to, as we were very shaken up by what we had just seen. Jay said that we must have seen a deer, but even I know deer don't have bat-like wings. Nothing was there when Jay drove us through. I said this creature never made a noise, despite me seeing it kind of slither out of the water and onto the gravel path. If I had to take a guess of what it looked like, I would say a dragon or a giant bird or even a bat of some kind. The wings, if they had been in a down position, would be as long as the body of the creature, and it was the density of the creature that first shocked me. It was the blackest, darkest thing I'd ever seen. I did find it odd why it wanted to hide its face, though. Em also said she saw the darkest of dark-winged creature and had no idea what it was either. When I got back to my home in the UK, I tried to research what this creature may have been, but all my searches come up with were the Mothman, but I saw no eyes, let alone red ones. I still have no real idea of what my friend and I witnessed that evening, and it still puzzles me to this day. And that's all for this Halloween episode of the Mystical Times blog podcast, and I do hope you enjoy those 2 very spooky experiences. Don't forget, if you've had a spooky encounter, then I want to hear about it. You can email me at mysticaltimesblog@gmail.com. For the next episode, episode 14, I'll be sharing some more ghostly Gloucestershire tales with you. Till next time.